we all have our reasons for being what you are, photographer, filmmaker. I want to share with you, I had no professional reason to be a photographer. What happened to me is that I grew up with these old people that I really learned to love, my great uncle and my great aunt. And my great uncle lived to die at 108. And his sister, my great aunt, lived to die at 97. But as a kid, I used to always love, because my mother would leave me with them sometimes since she was teaching and had professional things. And I would always love listening to them talk to their friends. And through listening to them talk to their friends, I learned a lot about life. And it became like living vicariously through them, so that I could understand a lot about people. So when I get to college, one day I'm visiting this old guy who's a photographer, and I'm seeing accidentally these pictures of old people the age of my relatives, very dignified farmers, rural people. And it made me realize that my great uncle and my great aunt, coming from my town of 800 people in Alabama, they only had two things on their wall. One was a farmer's almanac. The other one was a picture of Jesus Christ. And photography back then was expensive. So even in the 60s, I could not afford to ask this photographer to go to my home village and make pictures. I had to learn, buy a camera, and a year and a half later, I became good enough with a camera. In the beginning days, when the cameras were just beginning to have light meters. And I went home and I started making pictures of them. And the most happiest moment in my life was to give them a picture of themselves and to see them respond to it and to see their face go from recognition to pride and acceptance. Essentially, the image verified their agency. Until then, they always had agency, but this image verified their agency and then put it in a frame and put it on that wall. That's why I became a photographer. Because the photograph has the ability to communicate, and it can communicate in so many different ways based upon the user. That's why I say a photograph never lies about the photographer. If you're photographing things that you care about, love about, feel tender about, that's what that photograph is going to show. If you're photographing things that you're freaked out about, that you're scared about, or that you hate, that's what that photograph is going to show. Because there's no camera, there's no lens that can make a picture. Only your mind can make a picture. So the instrument that you use doesn't really matter what it is, because it's being filtered through your mind about how you are interfacing with this reality that's happening in your life at that particular moment. So I want to show you pictures, and I'm calling them Dancing with the Spirit. And why I use the Spirit is that I believe fundamentally, and one of my mentors taught me very early that, well, what is your message? How do you feel about life? Because the sooner you can answer those kind of questions, the clearer your focus becomes on what you're looking for. So I've always felt that, because I had an early experience when I was 9 with a night I woke up one night screaming because I had this apparition in my room. But what it and I thought it was death. But what it taught me there's a parallel world of spirit that we don't really have to be. Doesn't matter whether you want to be freaked out about it or whatever. It still exists, but you can accept it, and you can see it as. And I guess what it helps you do is helps you sort of de-egotize yourself, because it's not all about you here and now. It's about several layers of things that you happen to be part of. So I always like to look at life as a signature of the spirit. So how do you say, well, how does that work? If I'm looking at a portrait, I see the person. So for me, the person, though, is just is the tipping point. It's not where I'm really stopping when I'm trying to photograph. I try to go beyond what is obvious to get what is universal inside that whole thing. And then the spirit is Then I became, and years later, I'm in Cairo, and I'm photographing looking at the museum, the Mummy Room in Cairo Museum. And I'm really taken by the fact that I'm looking at mummies that are 2,000 and 3,000 years old. Another parallel world here. And the mummies look like who they are. It tells me something about the people, who they are. So what that then is sort of reinforces my original idea about the signature of the Spirit, and that we all are living at the pleasure, everything is happening at the pleasure of the Spirit. So now I say, let me try what I actually do with my camera, interfacing, is I'm dancing with the Spirit. So then, as a photographer, what am I looking at? There's several things about life, about me, that I'm trying to discover, because things are about me, but they may start with me, but they are also resonate with so many other different kinds of things. So this is my great uncle. It's because of him and his sister that I picked up the camera. And when he died at 108, my wife and I had our wedding at his graveside. He was really a special guy to me. And this is his sister, my great aunt Shug. So it's the love of my relatives that made me pick up the camera. This is my Aunt Shug again. And one of their friends. And this was my first understanding that you can make a portrait without showing a face. And these are also some of their friends. And a burial scene. Now, this burial scene is interesting to me because my great uncle, among many other things, he was the caretaker for the cemetery. And when you die, a lot of people in those days just put up a wooden cross. Well, wooden crosses after a few years fall. So if you have a limited amount of space, when they have to dig a new grave, there's no gravestone to tell you where a burial is. So his job was to take a long metal rod and poke the ground and find out where there was a space for a new grave to be dug. So as a kid, one day I remember while the guy's out there digging a grave, I wanted to jump down into the grave to just, I'm a kid, for the hell of it. And it wasn't that deep, but it was deep enough for me to have my eyes at ground level and to be able to see the world from a different perspective. So when I went back for this particular funeral, that memory kicked in, because normally it would not be unusual for people to make pictures of this from your waist and higher, but it's unusual to do it from this particular angle, and that's what informed me about doing it. I also do the same thing with children. I always squat with children, because normally people shoot down on kids, because, oh, you're a cute kid, come up here. And what that does is that diminishes the agency of the kid. When kids are really nothing but little people, they will grow up. But if you get on their level and look at their face and look in their eyes, they are fully there. They just don't have all the things that we have to be able to respond, but they are. And here's a group of kids in their early 70s. And, if you played on a team, there's something about the drama, the struggle that goes on. And I think in anything, when you're reflecting, recording people, you always can pull out of your subject that you know about yourself. So the more you know about yourself and your own experiences, and remember how those experiences affected you, when you see them in someone else, not only they become then a vehicle for tapping your memories as well as trying to capture what's going on. I thought it was interesting, being alone and loneliness and space, positive, negative space, all of those sort of things came to I'm dealing with here. I don't know if it's because I grew up in a dry county in Alabama. I don't drink. That doesn't mean I know a lot of friends who do. And also college is a period where those who you get introduced to drinking for a lot of different reasons. And then, the wars, veterans, drinking and smoking became a culture, a part of your life. And here you have these old guys hanging out in the bar in Harlem. The bar doesn't exist anymore, and this was in the late 70s, so they're probably dead as well. Here's another scene in morning coffee scene in Harlem. I like that early morning light, late afternoon light. To me, it's just a lot more dramatic in capturing human drama. And then sometimes, I have an idea and I want to play it out. I have a friend who has a sax and a friend who's a dancer and says, okay, let's go to the park. Let's, because dancers love taking up space. And music gives another kind of inspiration. So you're always working with things. Even when you don't plan it, things can happen. It can be very, very enlightening. This is a little more planned because back in the day of film, Kodak film, this is a red filter, a very long lens on the desert in Senegal. And this tree called the baobab tree, which is a humongous tree. You just think that there's something very spiritual about that particular tree. And this gets into my issues of identity and being an African American. Here you don't learn about your African identity, continental identity. So in 71, I started traveling after college, after Tuskegee, I started traveling into Africa. And since then I go to Africa once a year. I find it cheaper than therapy. And here was living in this island called Gorée in the harbor of Dakar, Senegal, where you have along West Africa, you have these holding forts that were used by either the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, the English, when they captured Africans to be sold into slavery in the Americas. And so this is at that door, they call it the door of no return, because during that time there was a pier outside and boats would tie up. And the dungeons would be emptied of the people walking through that door to be loaded on those ships. So they would never touch Africa again. This is why it's called the door of no return. And for years, decades, I've fought at the times, and I see it's gradually changing, where I know it's the public lexicon to always refer to that period and those people in that period as slaves. Slavery is the condition of those people. It's not the ethnicity of those people. And I try to remind people, and now the times have begun to use enslaved, because you enslave a person. But to say slave, you're using the term of the slaveholder, which means that culture continuously wins by dehumanizing the people. So yes, I come from a people who were enslaved, but because they were enslaved, they never stopped being African. They never stopped being people. This is another image from Mali. I was traveling to a place to see something, and all of a sudden this guy decided it's a long boat trip. He took a nap, and the positive negative spaces with a widening a lens just was begging, and all it needed was a red filter to tone down the light a little, and bah, voila. And here in some of the old dungeons that were slave holding grounds, you have these traditional priests who now have made them into healing centers to clean. And then there was this, here in New York, we found a thing called the African Burial Ground, where all of these bones down near City Hall were uncovered. And they had to go back to the old records, colonial days, to find out that this was in fact a burial ground for African people. And one of the most important, they did about 300, uncovered about 300 burials, and I was able to talk my way into get the government permission to be on site every other day when I felt like it, just to record what these burials would look like when they were, because I had this thing going back to my mummy thing, that okay, the mummies we know are of rich people, super rich people, but everybody's grave is the same tomb. But if I really believe that the spirit exists in all things and there's a memory we carry with us, even in the bones, it tells us stories about their lives. How much work they had to do, what kind of diet they had. There's so much there to be learned. And then when we came across this, we found 3 of these. These were the most important finds. I remember being there and someone came up to the director saying, "Oh, we found a body. It's in bad shape. We think maybe it must have been wrapped by a rope and drug in the street." And so let me see this. Because of the way the arms are folded, which is not an unusual kind of, thing to wonder. But then I saw it and I realized, because I've been going to Africa every year for 20 years, and because I study Egyptology, when I looked at it, I right away knew what it looked like. Have anybody looked at mummies or in the Metropolitan Museum or Egyptian symbols? The people always have their arms crossed like this. There's a crossing. It's called a sign of nullification. They're crossing out of the positive and negative forces, so that before you became Catholic, when people go by Catholics and they do this, in the old days, the world before Genesis, people did this when they passed the temples and what have you. And here is the last burial to be removed. And then I went to get a priest, because a priest who of the African religions, because these people definitely were not Christians or Muslims, but they believed in something, and I wanted people who believed in something similar. So here's my little girl in Africa. She must be about 6 or 7, and there I am on her level, and that way I'm capturing allowing her to give the full expression of herself. This is a village I lived in Senegal. I don't really speak any language. I'm lazy when it comes to language, but as photographers, there's a thin line between interfering with something that's going on and being able to capture it or changing it. And you always have to let people, you always have to ask permission to make someone's photograph, but there are ways of asking permission, and the bottom line is that you should not try to take away someone's right to say no. So if you speak the language, you can nod at a person that does it. So I decided to give myself a test to go to a place where I could not speak the language and see if I could make pictures and not get beat up by relying on nothing but body language. Looking, acknowledging their space, letting them know and to be able to vibe me or by their gut to see I'm not judging them, I'm just appreciating what's going on. And people, when they realize that you're not a threat to them, you're not judging them, you're one of them, then it's a lot easier to work with them. Here's a early morning. A father took his son to the beach. He drew out a perimeter in the sand, and then he put his son down and had his son kneel down. Then he put a Bible to the son's head and started praying at sunrise. Just a whole drama of it all. I'm into religious drama because it happens that a lot of stuff happens and that is focused in. It happens in those moments. This is in Brazil, the Sisterhood of the Good Death. This is also Brazil, the ritual to Omalu, a ritual to Obatala in Brazil. Omalu again. Yemenya, priestesses of Yemenya. And this is morning chores in Ethiopia. I learned this morning how to appreciate this kind of lighting from one mentor who was a painter, taught me about Dutch lighting. And then lighting, I like to say, is my mistress. So I pay a lot of attention to her, what she's doing, and work around with her. And this is a shot that most people know of my work. They probably know this picture. The positive and negative space. I believe that eyes are the windows into the soul. You jump what is coming out, jump right in. And this is a daylight photograph in Brooklyn. Rituals again. This is out in Coney Island. This religious group, African religious group. And then I do these portraits of old people. Since I grew up with old people, I have this feeling about old people. And one of the things I felt very torn about is because in New York and the rest of the culture, we look at old people as being very dispensable and invisible. And the Madison Avenue culture is all about being young, 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 which is fine. But if we are lucky, we will become old. And I did this project. I always do self-assigned projects, and I did this project that became a book called Elder Grace, and it was a major exhibition up at the New York Historical Society. And to me, the best comments were when I had young people write down, "Oh, when I get that age, I want to look just like this. I want to look just like that." So it changed, the whole idea of what beauty and aging could be. Here, aging as well, but there's something else here. The guy is blind, but there's a lot going on in his mind. So how do you? I saw a photograph that was done by Karsh of Ottawa of Pablo Casal, and then there was another conductor, and it was just a very a picture that showed nothing but cognitive process in something that you couldn't see the whole person, couldn't see the whole face, but you appreciate what was going on. Here again, my Elder Grace images. And then one day I found this woman walking, and I loved her, and I made a picture, but I didn't like the lighting, the daylight, so I called her back and I said, "Well, can I come make a picture of you and set up my lights?" She said, "Sure." So I get there and I see her husband, and I said, "Wow, this doesn't work every time." But when I said I saw her husband, I recognized the relationship. There was a very special relationship. I have this theory about relationships that I've come to learn over time, is that your best relationships that people have are what I call emotional spooning, spoons fitting into another. Too often relationships are forks and knives. So if you keep that in mind, when you see people, try to see if you can tell. Don't talk to them, just look. See what you're looking at. Am I looking at emotional spooning? Am I looking at a fork and knife? Because that's an expression, that's a personality of a relationship that comes up. So let me do this emotion. Emotional spoonings are rare, so you're going to see more forks and knives. But when you see emotional spooning, they're rare, and you can appreciate it. And then looking again, portraits again with no face. The young people, I think, call this bling. And then I lived for a time in Ghana, and I would go back and forth. And this particular year there was a new old king of the Ashantis died, and a new one came in, and I was able to go do a royal portrait of him. And now this is the Blue Nile. I spent a lot of time going back and forth on the Blue Nile. From my first time in Blue Nile was in '73. I went to Ethiopia, and then I went to Egypt. I think I went to Ethiopia like May, June. I went to Egypt in September, and then end of August, and then the war broke out in September, '73 war, and I found myself stuck there for about 6 weeks because all the airports were closed, but it gave me more time to really to just be more impressed with the antiquities that are left behind, the buildings in Egypt. And this is from a tomb looking out in Sudan, but all the Egyptian temples had the same structure. They're called pylons in the front, because in the world before Genesis, people will start their temple service before sunrise. So when the sunrise rose, that's when they end their service. The new day was a promise for their praying. This is a sacred lamb. These are smaller pyramids in Egypt has these huge pyramids that are 45-degree angle. The Sudanese have smaller pyramids that are 60-degree angles, shorter and smaller, but this is a difference. This is inside one of the tombs of one of those pyramids in Sudan. The records of the humans left behind on the wall, what the dreams that they had in the sacred dreams that they were trying to live out in their own imagination. Instead of the photographs, the drawings and paintings of the final ceremonies of taking the casket into the tomb, and rituals, royal rituals left in stone. And in the desert sands. Because overnight, so one morning I woke up and out of my tent, this is what I'm looking at. Because the sands have shifted, the nighttime sands are always moving, so you see, to me, it's like the fingerprints of the wind in the face. As you get older, the lifelines of the face. And that's when I would get up at sunrise, and then would try to work to shoot the buildings. So the only thing out there in the desert is me and the vipers and the cobras. But I didn't attract them, so I'm okay. And in one of the tombs in Egypt, what I call the Stations of the Prayer. And this particular tomb in Egypt is very important from an archaeological point of view, but forget that. It's just there's 3 chambers. You're seeing out of one chamber into another one of this tomb that was from 2500 BC. And temples, the Temple of the Woman in Philae. This is mixing Brazilian, African religious woman with the Egyptian. The pyramids at full moon. African Americans and European Americans, African Europeans, who make annual trips to Egypt because they see the Egyptian religion as their sacred heritage. So, here's one of my mummies. This is the Mummy of Ramesses the Great. Now, most people make pictures of this mummy either, from the top if you're going to do it, or from you're trying to get as much as the face. But to me, that wasn't really, I was after something else, so that you could get a little bit more. And this is lighting it and angle it. Lighting is everything. After the subject matter, lighting is everything, because lighting is the verb. It's the thing that amplifies it. And this is a sculpture of Ramesses. And this is the pyramid at Giza. This pyramid is 35 stories high. So if you ever go into a building and an elevator and you're on the 35th floor and there's a window, go look out the window. This is what it looks like if you're on the top of this building. And until the Eiffel Tower was built, it was the tallest building in the world. And I've climbed this building twice. Some people, when they're coming, some people don't die climbing this building. Actually, they die trying to come down, because you have to come down facing it. If any of you do rock climbing or mountain climbing, you have to face the mountain. And if you're not used to that and you try to come down and you're facing out, you're going to topple over. And that's what happens to people who tend to die from this. This is also a temple in Karnak, the Sphinx and the pyramid. And these are the ancient boats of Ethiopia called tanquas. And these boats are made out of papyrus. They pull this papyrus together and they're water ready. Ethiopia. This may be a different image of Ethiopia than you're used to, but this is what Ethiopia looks like. These are the obelisks of Ethiopia. On both ends of the Nile, the only place in the world where you have these tall, 8 stories to 10 stories, solid piece of stone. They're called obelisks. The Egyptian obelisks have a lot of hieroglyphs on them because they're like a bulletin board. They're telling you how great the pharaoh is and how great the god is. The Ethiopian obelisks are not dressed. The only thing they may have is a thing at the bottom that's we call a false door or a spirit door, because they are used at the grave sites of the emperors, whereas the Egyptian obelisks are used in front of the temples. There's a group of people in Ethiopia who believe in nature. This is in the Temple of the Woman who believe in nature, that nature was the first Bible. There's a priest from that. And then I started doing people in the South. And I wanted to photograph the people in the South because it's so hot. People don't wear, their clothing is very minimal. So that women will not wear tops because it's just too hot. The men wear smaller skiffs but no top. So I tried to decide how could I make really dignified portraits of people who we may have, when we're conditioned to have a negative feeling about exposure. So the first thing I decided to do is to put them in a New York City high fashion studio. Well, I couldn't bring them here. But what I had to do is I had to invest in getting 4 Lumidyne units that work off a battery, and Lumidyne heads and box lights and backdrops and high-rise, and take all of that to Ethiopia. And for 4 years, each year, I left that in place. All I had to do is back and forth is to take new batteries. Everything was camping. So we use these Honda things overnight to charge the batteries back up, and we're ready to go for the next day. Go from village to village and set them up and work it. And when I would go to the villages, I would talk to the village elders and say what I wanted to do, and ask if they mind my making pictures, and ask how much should I pay them. And then I would I would take them, make their portrait, get their name, my assistant would pay them, and one person after another do the same thing. But in shooting the women and the girls, I tried to angle myself in such a way that I de-emphasize the breasts, but allow so that the person could really speak through. Yeah, I didn't want to objectify them, sexualize them, exoticize them, just try to see as people who they were. And these are those obelisks in Ethiopia with the false door at the bottom. And this is in '73. I went my first year to Ethiopia, and I photographed Haile Selassie. I was very impressed with Haile Selassie as a person, and I began to study him later politically, and also more impressed. And this is a burial place of Haile Selassie. This is a 5th century BC temple to the moon, to the woman. And Ethiopia, they have fewer now, but there was a time when there was a huge Jewish population. And in one of those times I was able to photograph these, they had these holding camps, one in Gondar, one is in Addis, and I was able to work and make portraits. And this is one of the rituals that they have among the Jews who are still left in Ethiopia. Is called Sig, where they commemorate the time that Moses went up on top of Mount Sinai and received the Torah of the Ten Commandments, and they do a reenactment once a year. They go to a high mountain in Ethiopia. All the mountains are high in Ethiopia. The shortest mountains are usually about 6,000 feet. They go up to 15. And this is where they say the Holy of the Holies. They say this is where the Ark of the Covenant is actually kept in that building on the right. And this is a priest in a church that's on top of a mountain that's 8,600 feet above sea level. I went there because I wanted to photograph the Milky Way. And just where that end of that rock is, there's a mile drop down into a canyon. So it takes a little effort to get there. This is inside of one of the traditional churches because they're made in the round. And this is one in Lotta that's dug out of the rock, dug out of the mountain. This is it from the top. Sacred cave for Muslims. Islamic Prayer. Ethiopia. This is the Milky Way. If you ever see shots of Milky Ways, in the northern hemisphere, the Milky Way is always perpendicular to the horizon. And the southern hemisphere is parallel, it's horizontal with the horizon. And also, if you're looking at the study astrophotography to get this picture, the easiest picture to make of the night sky, if you ever seen those pictures where the stars are doing like that, that's the easiest one to make. All you have to do is know where North Star is, and you aim your camera at the North Star and hold it open and you get it. But to make and because the Earth moves a mile every 15 seconds, in order to get crisp pictures of the stars closest to you, you have to do it between the 15 to 20 seconds, maybe 25 at the most, because if it's past that, it's going to streak. Oh, this is a book I did on my pictures from Sudan. This is a book I'm working on. The Nile is an incredible river. It's the only river that travels north. People didn't realize that, and I didn't realize it for 20 years of going back and forth until I start realizing that the plane from Egypt kept going up to get to Ethiopia. And that made me start looking at topographical maps. And then I discovered this. This is why it goes north, because it's coming from 6,000 feet above sea level. By the time it gets to Cairo, it's only about 50 feet above sea level. This is the river coming out of Ethiopia. And this is our earliest ancestor. They called her Lucy, but the Ethiopians call her Denkonesh. But this is the fossilized bones of Lucy, who's 3.5 million years old. So now I stopped photographing people. I now do inanimate things. I challenge myself there again on the same thing about spirit. That the spirit exists in everything, and I'm looking for the signature of the spirit. So I started looking at nature. A friend of mine, a critic, says when photographers get a certain age, they all start making pictures of flowers and things. They become an Edward Weston. Well, he has a point there, but I found out to me that the spirit didn't work for me in living flowers. It worked for me in dead ones. And so for years I started experimenting with different leaves. And then I began to realize that certain leaves, when they draw back, say a lot. They have a lot of personality into them, but most of them don't. So then I had to start looking for my wife, who's into plants, helped me discover these larger leaves called elephant ears. They grow from 3 to 6 feet long, but they shrink back to 1 foot to 3 feet. So I can work with them. And so I would take these leaves, I would grow these leaves in my window boxes. I would take them and I would hang them up like tobacco leaves over the winter. And then sometime during the winter, after a few months of shrinking, then I would look at them and see which ones spoke to me and then try to photograph them. Now, none of these are made with cameras. but trying to look at the unique personality of each of the leaf and what it said about this leaf has been is something that's dangled in the air. It's like fingers in the air. So look at the spirit in these fingers. Thank you. Now this is what my website used to look like. Now it's much better. Thank you. Comments?
Were you always interested? I really like how you kind of combine ancient, like these ancient Egyptian and the African. Like it's such an like learning about these things. You don't see anything updated or new but the way you show it, it makes you feel kind of like you've been in that, you were in that time. So I feel like this is a refreshing thing to see for someone that likes like ancient civilizations. Like I love the study of like ancient Egypt. This is just like super refreshing to see, but like, and also like to have like in like these should be in something that should be in textbooks. Like kids should learn like by looking at this, because that brings you to that time feel kind of, instead of looking at like illustrations that are put in textbooks. But definitely.
Thank you. I agree. They should be in textbooks, maybe. But you know, one thing about the ancientness is that had I not been in Egypt originally for TWA to photograph a travel brochure and had not gotten stuck there, I really would not have been able to see or to feel next door of time, so to speak. But having been in those monuments, I felt like, wow, I was really impressed. I was awed. And I also kind of felt very disappointed that I was late to the party. Because all this great stuff is happening that's being shown on these walls. But then it sort of, that made me, I wasn't really a student of history until then. So, but gradually I've become so absorbed with it that after photography, my passion is Egyptology, is ancient world. Because, you know, we are, and I think if we can, but it also means that I'm not really stuck on 21st century where I'm at, because that is real, but that's not all that's real. And we've been here, humans have been here before, we've done all this, and the drama we worked through all before, and it's just interesting to see how we humans have dealt with stuff. And so, thank you. Did I see you? Oh, okay.
Out of all the places you've been to and visited, had there been ever trouble with people not wanting to take, having their photograph taken, or they're always open to it?
No means no. Wherever it is, no means no. I'm not a thief. I'm not going to violate people. And, you know, I see pictures, a lot of pictures that win awards, and you can see the person is doing this, that. They're saying no. And the photographer is being a thief. And but people who don't know what's going on see it for, you know, graphics or whatever. They think it's a great picture. But no means no. I don't have a problem with no, because my fundamental feeling is if I feel I'm with the Spirit, if the Spirit intends for me to have a picture, it'll make it possible. Maybe next year, maybe next week, maybe next month, who knows? But, you know, I'm just going to ride. It's like a surf. I'm going to surf on the Spirit here. I'm not going to try to go into a control mode, because control is an illusion. Just let it go. Because what's for me is going to be for me. What's not for me, I don't need. So being at peace with that, I think, is what allows you to accept the fact that no means no, and it's okay. Okay. And then he, yeah. Yeah.
So, are you still shooting on film?
Am I?
Are you still shooting on film for the work you do now?
I'm not, but you know, I worked at the Times for 4 decades, and I was the last photographer to switch from film to digital. And then for a long time afterwards, even though I was shooting only digital for the Times, when I would go back to Africa every year, I would shoot both. And then gradually as the files got bigger, I would then start shooting digital, and and then burn my CDs in the field and backup and everything. But that was only after the digital files got better. There's a limitation to digital. The limitation is that it's by nature flatter than film. But if you understand light and layering light especially, you can overcome it. I think he had a question.
So with all your research on Egyptology and astrophotography and topography and all that, how did that further your series? How did that help you complete your series?
Well, I think that, the more that you know about a subject, your photograph, this is what I learned from shooting authors. I've been taught that if you're going to do an author's portrait, you should read what they write, because then and then when you talk to them, you have something else to build upon. But the more you know about what you're looking at, the more layers you can put into the photograph. So that if you deconstruct my images based upon your research of something, what you know about something, the more you know about what you're looking at, you'll be able to see those layers. It's not necessary that you know all that, because the whole idea for a photographer is to make it simple. But I'm saying for someone who is visual, you get one message. Someone who's historical, you get one message. Someone who's social, you get another message. Someone who's particularly into Egyptology, you get another message. Someone who's in astrophotography, you get another message. All of these things are there because I had to learn, by learning each one of them, then you layer them, long before Photoshop. You layer them in your mind so that that information is hidden or in plain sight or is available. Did you have a comment? The film, okay. Well, being everybody's a purist about film. You can't beat film. But what really made me change from film was this. One year, I spent a whole 6 weeks shooting my ass off. Some of my best stuff ever made. And back in the day, you had to convince the X-ray people in security, please don't do my film. And then they invented these bags that supposedly protect you from that. Well, I came from one trip with my film spotted when I processed it. Just little spots throughout the whole film from an X-ray machine. Because you didn't have, if I'm coming from different countries, I had to go through different checks. So to me, it all came together, okay, I can't do this anymore. So and luckily, digital had arrived at a point that I didn't have to do that anymore. The X-ray machines were not going to mess up the digital, but it did mess up the film. Now, I'm sure, I like to think that that's not a problem anymore, but I don't do film traveling anymore, so I don't know.
I have a question for you. So I love your beginning story, talking about your family and your great uncle and great aunt and stuff, and that's, pretty inspiring. And I think everybody in the room, as starting photographers, have some similar or some story that got them interested. But I guess what I'd love for you to talk to them about is what is that next step? What does that look like? And maybe just, I don't know, if you had a hint of guidance into following a certain path or knowing how to notice it or see it, maybe that would be.
Well, for me, I got to the next step because even though I got into photography because of the love for my family, that love for my family in the civil rights movement was going on. And I was a student at Tuskegee, and we would go on demonstrations to George Wallace because we didn't like George Wallace. And the media, when we look at it the next day, nothing different. They've always been there. But the photographers didn't see us as American citizens petitioning the government for change. They saw us as potential thugs, arsonists, and rapists, which made me wake up. It's a slap in the face. Wow. I've seen pictures of us. We learned to ignore pictures of us because whenever there's pictures of us, we're always a problem. But here, now that I've been I'm beginning to understand the power of the camera and the power of the visuals, I realized that yes, we are these same people, but the photographer is someone else. That's why I learned that a photograph, people used to say a photograph never lies. I go a step further. The photograph never lies about the photographer. You're at the mercy of the photographer. So then it made me realize that, okay, my love for my people became hitched to a political agenda. So I had to figure out a way to make sure that my photographs from the inside became part of the national conversation. And the only way that could happen is that I had to become a very good photographer. I had to train my eye. So I came to New York in '69. There are no schools like you have now. You had to find a photographer that you could mentor with. So I went to the newsstand and I picked up all the magazines that use photographs well. And I looked up to see, because I spent an exchange summer and semester at Harvard, and working with Harvard business agencies, I learned by doing Harvard projects that, you can go to the top and you can talk to people. So I called all these people up and I said, look, I'm a student in Alabama. I want to be a photographer. But first thing you should know, I'm not looking for a job. What I am looking for is for you to look at my portfolio because you see the best photographers. I know I'm not good enough. What I want you to do is, can you look at my work and tell me how to bridge this gap? Because what I need to do is I need to find out a way to get the images, the images of my people that are always missing in the media, and those are 3 different images: decency, dignity, and virtuous character. I want to be the warrior, the visual warrior, to capture those images and get them out there. But they're not going to, you don't want them unless they're competitive. Understandable. And I don't want them either unless they're competitive. So during that summer, a few weeks in, I had the luck of running into a man named Arthur Rothstein, who was a first FSA photographer. And he was head of photography at Look magazine. And he took a liking to me and my yearning to learn, my enthusiasm, and what began as a one-day session where I learned cropping and telling me that, and he asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to change this image. He said, well, that's kind of big, but let me see what you got. And we start working from there. That became a daily thing. And then when he thought I was good enough, I then started doing other assignments, and when I came back from school, he gave me my first job and introduced me to the gallery scene, because I think the most important thing is that photography is about communication, whether you're a commercial photographer or a journalistic photographer. It's about the communication of ideas. And the thing is that your picture is kind of like, if you imagine you have a child who goes off to kindergarten. Once that kid goes through the door, there's nothing you can do. The kid is on his own. Your image is the same way. Your image has to be done so tightly and so well that once it leaves you, it doesn't need you to stand. It is somehow you've created something that snatches the consciousness of the person who's looking at it, that it then goes to the next step. Because you want to find a way to get your message, but you also want to find a way to pay your bills. Now the market has changed a lot. But it's always changing. The only thing certain in life is change. So what happened to me in my period probably won't work for you, but I don't know the new possibilities in your period that are opening. I mean, social media is a whole new thing. But then, how do you exploit that? I remember when Getty and these agencies were just starting, and they were paying photographers so little, and they were not charging much. But now they've captured all the pictures, so anybody who wants to use them have to pay an awful lot of money. So there is some value in your unique vision. The thing is that you have to find who is it valuable to, and how do you leverage that value in any particular situation. There's going to be several. It's not going to be one. You're going to have a whole lot of, you have to become, I think that all photography and art students should not be they should not be graduating unless they had 1 semester in business management of themselves. Because unless you look at yourself as a business, and unless you look at yourself as always being trying to formulate a marketing plan that advances your vision and your earning potential, you're going to have trouble. There's a group I go meet with that's called, and it's mostly older photographers, but they deal with a lot of these issues because the market has changed. It's a group called APAG, A-P-A-G. You should write that down or put it in your phone. And they have these monthly meetings, and they talk about all the different issues about how do you make money, whether that money is commercial, whether it's galleries, whether it's publishing, and then how do you protect your rights, and which rights are we talking about? And so all I'm saying is that you are creating a product, but the more you approach that product from a business point of view rather than from being the artist of it, you have to step out of that head and step in this head over here so that you can exploit it. And that exportation, what is a market? Find out what market works for you and try them all. Try the gallery market, try the publishing market, try the commercial market. But because you gotta, it's like playing a keyboard. You gotta play and you gotta work with all of them. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. And obviously the more effectively you play that market, the better your results will be. That doesn't mean that every time everything you play is going to work, but the odds are in your favor if you keep coming up with ideas.
You mentioned before about no means no. If someone doesn't want a picture, you can't take it. How would you balance that as someone who's an artist, but maybe someone who's been hired, like as a journalist, to take photos, to be in an area or around subjects that don't want them, but to also balance, I'm here professionally to get these photos. Kind of what's a good tip to get everyone happy and not get everyone pissed off at you? It's really what I'm asking.
Well, you're describing an antagonistic situation. So I try not to be but I'll try to answer another way. In being a photojournalist, we're in situations, let's say if you're in a situation where there's a riot or there's a big demonstration, and you are making pictures, and some people may feel vulnerable, but the fact that they're in public, they've dissolved themselves for that. But the real issue would be when someone is killed, some tragedy happens, the paper at some point always wants to try to get a picture of the person who was killed. You can't make that picture. So you have to try to find who has that picture. So that means either a relative or a girl or someone they're in a relationship with. So going to the relative's house to ask for a picture, to copy a picture, not to take that picture, but to copy a picture of that deceased relative is always a very sensitive thing that could go wrong quickly. So so you have to diffuse that. And what I always do when I go is I never forget that I'm dealing with another human being. So the first thing that a human being should do when you talk to someone who's lost somebody is what? To offer your condolences. And after you offer your condolences in a meaningful way, then talk to them and, about their memories of this person. And then ask, well, do you have a photograph? Can I make a copy of it? Some people have luck with that, some people don't. But that's a very difficult, it's not being antagonistic, but it could be, it could be a blocker. But I think there's always a way. To me, if you have to fight and steal for it, means that, you should just step back and treat it like it was you. And then you probably get a different, how would I like for someone to, if I'm in that situation? And then your mind would give you probably another approach to it that may work.
Any other questions?
You spoke about, I think it's off. Can anyone hear me? Anyway, so you spoke about being an artist and as opposed on the other side, doing the business of being an artist. You know, so is there any way you find a balance in how much you should invest your time in doing your commission work and your personal work, and at the same time finding time to dedicate to your business? Can you shed some light on that?
Well, I think that you can't do anything unless you have a roof over your head. So that's the number one priority. And the more you get that, the more you have that roof strong, the stronger you make that roof, the more you can do your personal work. And then I worked at the paper for 40 years, but I always had, to me, I did 16 hours a day. I did 8 hours for the paper, and I did 8 hours for me. And I slept 8 hours. So I kept essentially my college schedule. So that way I was able to produce with my own personal projects, knowing that if I waited until I retired to do my personal projects, my body would fail me. So exploit the body and the energy now. So when I get to this age, then I don't need as much energy to archive and review because I have the material. So I think you have to be strategic about it, and I think you have to decide which is first most important. That's the roof. Second most important, the commercial, and the third most important is the personal. Until you can get to the point that you can flip it. When you get to that point, then if you have the personal work is then taking care of everything else, then you can flip it. But until you can flip it, you need to do it that way. Okay. Thank you, guys.